passing this on from the approach control, a possible pilot deviation, Class B violation. I've got a phone number for you to call when you get the signature.
How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to Mojo Grip. Mike here. I did get in trouble with the FAA. I am putting myself out here like I always do whenever I make a mistake in this space called aviation. I do that because, one, I want you to learn from my mistake and avoid it completely. And also it gives me an opportunity to learn something new. Maybe somebody with the same experience can let me know in the comments. But here's what happened. One winter morning, I was on my way from Atlanta, Georgia to Winston-Salem, North Carolina, which I travel very often because our build shop flight school is there. And I've probably flown this route 100 times in the last 2 years. And normally when I fly cross country, either to Winston-Salem or any other flying that I do that's with more than 100 or so miles, I always get flight following. And this is a discussion we've actually had on this channel, whether or not you should use flight following. If you are new to flying, flight following is basically a free tool. It's like another eye in the skies that look out for you. They help you look for traffic. They advise you on weather and other things just to help you have a safe flight. Flight following is not always available. I've had several situations where I tried to get flight following and I've had people literally told me to F off. I've had a guy literally tell me, don't bother me right now. And he was very straightforward with it. So not every time would you get flight following when you ask for it. But particularly on this route that I've flown a lot of times, I always get flight following. And I also know my airways or my airspaces, which let's deviate a little bit. Part of your flying experience, or if you're a student pilot, you will learn about airspaces. We have the Alpha, Bravo, Delta, Charlie, Echo, Golf. You need to know what the limitations of what these airspaces are, meaning you can't just fly into any airspace really without permission. I think the only airspace where you can fly on your own without getting permission is a Class Golf. Just about every other airspace outside of a Golf, you need to get permission to get into and or fly in that airspace. And more particularly, a Class Bravo. And I'm speaking as a VFR pilot. A Class Alpha, for example, you cannot get into a Class Alpha except you're flying instrument. As a VFR pilot, you can't fly in just about every other airspace except for Alpha. Bravo is generally airspaces that you have your airliners, you have bigger jets, and bigger airplanes flying in. And that's why it's more regulated and they want to keep everybody safe. So Bravo in more particular, you have to get permission in order to fly in that airspace. So why is this important? Well, on my way from Georgia to North Carolina, there's a big Class Bravo right before I get to my destination, and it's the Charlotte Bravo. 10 out of 10 times, I'm using flight following, and I always request to get a transition through that airspace. When you're actively using flight following, one of the benefits is the fact that you don't necessarily need to get permission from each controller of any airspace you fly through. So, for example, if I'm flying through a Class Delta, I don't need to call another person. The person handling me as ATC just passes me through. Same goes for Echo, same goes for Charlie. Now, if I wasn't using flight following, every time I'm either close to or getting ready to get into any of those airspaces, I would have to call the controlling tower or agent for those airspaces to ask for permission for me to fly through their airspace. Since I'm using flight following, that task is erased for me, so I can fly through, like I said, Golf, Echo, Delta, Charlie, and my ATC person is helping me out. When I get to a Bravo, or when you get to a Bravo, you still need permission. One option is to ask ATC for permission. The person you're already speaking to, just ask them, hey, I'm looking at this Class Bravo in front of me. Is it possible to get a transition over or past it? They would either tell you no, they can tell you to deviate by reducing your altitude, meaning descending, or they can tell you absolutely not. This Bravo is very busy for whatever reason, which then means that you're on your own. So you would either need to climb over that class Bravo, meaning you generally have to climb over 10,000 feet, or you need to get lower below the shell of that class Bravo. Now, the Charlotte Bravo that I'm flying through on this day, they have several shells. They have one at 4,000, 5,000, or 6,000, and so on and so forth. And again, in the past, I generally get permission and I fly through it at 9,500 feet. I've had one or two cases where I would get permission, but I'd be asked to reduce down to 8,500 or 5,000. That's only happened maybe once or twice. So on this beautiful morning, I'm flying along. And just like I've done in all of my flying, I stay ahead of the airplane. So I know that this Bravo is coming ahead. And as pilot in command, you generally want to call much further out, maybe 20 miles out or 15 miles out before you get closer to that Bravo, because there is the possibility that you may not get permission to go into it, so you'd have to deviate. So either go outside of the shelf, or as I said, climb on top of it. On this very day, I had flight following and I was talking to ATC. And as I'm getting closer to the Bravo, I do what I've done many, many times. And I'm calling in asking, hey, can I get, requests? That's generally what I do. I'll ask for requests.
Barge, good morning, November 661 My Golf. Ride 661 My Golf, like to request a flight following to Kilo Indian, November Tango.
And then when I hear dead silence, I would call in again. Now, generally, on this particular day, I remember still hearing ATC talk to other pilots in the air. So I'm assuming that he's still with me. And sometimes when you call in either for a request or whatever, when somebody already has you and they don't respond immediately, doesn't necessarily mean that they've already dropped you. It could just mean that they're busy, especially when you hear a lot of chatter on the radio. It could mean that they're busy helping, another pilot or several other pilots. So just be patient and call back in. So on this day, I thought that was the case, where at one point I would hear them talk to somebody else and I would just wait. Long story, I called in 2 to 4 times, just calling in like, hey, do you still have me? At one point I said, hey, how do you hear me? Remained dead silence.
I was using flight following. I'm still with flight following, but for whatever reason, they lost me. So because I'm flying through a class Bravo, I had to climb over 10,000 feet so I don't break that airspace.
Maybe on 4,000 feet downwind.
And I should be descending shortly in another 10 minutes or so.
And by the time I realized, I was already just by a tiny bit hitting the shelf of a class Bravo. Again, I was at 9,500 feet, and I believe this shelf was the 6,000 shelf or the 4,000 shelf. And immediately when I saw what had happened, I just climbed. I was there for like a split second, and I made sure I climbed because I was already at 9,500. I only needed to climb over 10,000 feet. And I thought, okay, poof, I dodged the bullet there. Anyway, I get to my landing destination. So I'm approaching Winston-Salem Airport and I do my normal procedure. I come in to land. And as soon as I land, I get instructions to turn at a taxiway as you normally would. And as I'm taxiing down to Signature, that Twin Tower called in and asked me to confirm my tail number, which was November 661 My Golf. So I did, and he responded by saying, yeah, we just received a call from Charlotte and they told us that you did XYZ. And I was like, oh no. And he goes to say that I have a phone number for you when you're ready to copy.
And One My Golf, where are you going to park, sir?
To Signature, One My Golf.
One My Golf, Roger, you make the right turn there on Alpha Cross, runway 14, then Foxtrot to the ramp.
All right turn, cross 14, Foxtrot to the ramp, One My Golf.
One My Golf, what's the full call sign, sir?
It's November 661 My Golf.
661 My Golf, thanks. Passing this on from the approach control, a possible pilot deviation, Class B violation. I've got a phone number for you to call when you get to Signature.
Now, I had never been in this type of situation before, so everything was sort of new to me as well. So as soon as I, got out of the airplane, I grabbed a pen, I called the number, and they told me what had happened. And I also tried to explain to them that yes, I realized that I notched that shelf, but I climbed immediately. And I also let them know that I had assumed that I was with ATC and I was trying to get ATC to clear me through. Now, the good thing is that Charlotte or any other controlling tower agent for an airspace, they record these audio conversations. So they will hear me on those calls trying to get their attention, or trying to get the attention of the handler that I was with. Anyway, they collected my pilot information, name, and all that good stuff. From what he described, that this is a process where an investigation would happen. All the pilots that I've spoken to about this let me know that yes, it's just more of a procedural thing, and you will hear from the FAA regarding what your next step is. And also, being that this is your first time as a first-time offender, you may get a slap on the wrist. But essentially, I have to wait and see what will happen. But again, I'm telling this story to help you avoid being in the same position. Again, generally speaking, when we have a tool that we use, especially when you're flying, you use that tool consistently enough that you trust it too much, and it could put you in a bad position at any point during your flying career. And in this case, it was me using flight following. Now, does this mean that I would never use flight following again? No, of course, I will always use flight following, but I also understand that I'm still piloting command, and if I get in a situation where I'm using flight following, I'm going to start prioritizing deviating away from a Bravo should I get, as I see it coming up. Because in this case, again, 10 out of 10 times, I'd always just gotten a transition over. Generally speaking, again, another option could have been for me to climb. But in this particular route, the reason I don't climb further up is because I literally need to start descending as soon as I get out of that Bravo. So it didn't make sense for me to go up, further up, and then start further descent. And that's why I would always get transition over. But for those of you out there, if you fly cross country or you have a Bravo generally in your path, if you use ATC, don't depend fully on that flight following, because you might run into a radio situation or equipment failure situation where they're not able to hear you or pick you up, and vice versa. And in my case, I kept trying to communicate and it didn't happen. So now I have to deal with the consequences, and I hope that you don't make the same mistake. I'm curious if you've ever experienced this before. Please let me know in the comments what the process was like for you and what actually happened. Okay, thank you all so much for spending time with me. Again, my name is Mike, and I will catch you on the next video.